So here today with me, my guest is Jasen. Jasen is a strategist with a really nice background. He had some experiences in AIG and at American Express as well. So a worldwide interesting view for sure. And well, you are welcome, Jasen. Let's try to figure out something about this upcoming new normal that we are all with uncertainty, but as strategists as well, with a kind of responsibility in dealing with these questions.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. Super exciting discussion, right? This discussion of the new normal is fascinating and obviously super relevant to everyone right now, right? So when we talk about the new normal, let's talk about kind of the new normal during COVID-19, but maybe the more aggregate, abstracted new normal. I think the COVID-19, fingers crossed, is a fairly temporary new normal. But the broader discussion of what the new normal is something that needs to be on every leader's, the top of every leader's mind today. And I think really that's about kind of accelerated tech-enabled transformation and disruption. So,
Nice.
Every organization, in one way or another is facing, this reality today. And I think the first part of this is that technology is enabling or is rapidly evolving the way that we can deliver value to customers in new and pretty exciting ways. Whether you look at cloud technologies, machine learning and AI, robotic process automation, augmented reality, 3D printing, it's just amazing, the range of technologies that are being commercialized today and are really fundamentally altering the value logic across industries. Then you think about blockchain and autonomous delivery and the opportunity for innovation and the risks of disruption are really just fantastic. And for a strategist, particularly one with a love for technology and a fascination with new ways of working, it's a really kind of unbelievable time right now.
I remember that some months ago, we used to speak about disruption and looking for, well, several industries being disrupted, the main players, and also about the future of work. We used to listen lots of different perspectives on the future of work. But now, these both questions are, let's say, altogether in a blank page. Because however we all can see the importance and the role playing of technology, for example, this uncertainty that we are facing now brings again the old reflections about how is going to be the next chapter of our lives. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, in the United States, for example, where of course there is a huge economy and lots of early adopters. Can we imagine a whole different landscape in terms of the future of work and altogether with adoption of new technologies, or in this new normal, maybe we are going to face just a recovery of the previous insights and the previous intentions that we were used to listen?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is really about pace, right? So as we recover from COVID-19, we're probably going to come back to, kind of the normal structure that most people are used to. The future of work is going to be altered a little bit. I think it's an acceleration of the trends that were already taking place, right? So the remote work, that discussion of how do we balance remote work with co-location and collaboration, which is then placing a larger premium on agile ways of working. So how do we energize, align, engage, and empower our teams to deliver amazing results in a distributed way, as an example, right? So I think what we're going to see is an acceleration of those trends, and those groups that can adopt both technology for collaboration and technology for innovation, as well as agile ways of working for increased focus, innovation, collaboration, productivity, and then those folks who can evolve their concepts or their models around ways of work. I'm sorry, the future of work, right? So that discussion of how does leadership need to change with this pace of innovation? How do what are our talent strategies? Do we have one? Is it clear? Is it adaptable? And is it really targeted based on the way that our organization needs to evolve rapidly and in an aligned way? And that last part of incentives, performance management, bonuses. Gosh, we're talking about working in teams and collaboration, more and more these days. So we're talking about team and we, but almost everything in our performance management systems is about I. And there's a dissonance between the way that we're trying to encourage our workforce to collaborate and then the way that we reward them. So there's going to be just a tremendous amount or a need to evolve and kind of normalize our delivery model, our business model, our people strategy, our technology strategy, our product strategy in very rapid and aligned ways.
You mentioned agility. Agility is another buzzword that is always sounding alike. We no longer wish to see those red tapes and bureaucracy around us. It was already being inside our thoughts previous COVID-19. But I think that maybe now, not only accelerating the pace of this cultural change, but also maybe an exchange in value, I think that, for example, a human-centered approach that is also something that we're used to hear about. I am sure that at least it is a desire, it is a dream, it is something that most of us want to see in our organizations. Not only less bureaucracy, but a much more human-centered approach in order to have this team spirit working way in the future of work. And I know that you are an agile coach and a consultant experienced in agility, Jasen. So what would you add specifically about the agility mindset in this post-COVID world? Shall we think, or shall we imagine a homogeneous or a common environment where every single company adheres to this mindset?
Yeah, there's some really interesting questions in there, right? And I think one of the first discussions we should have, it's a really important one, is what's the difference today around agility in terms of a conceptual interest versus investment in action? So when you look at most organizations, that discussion of agility, the importance of kind of customer centricity and experiment-driven innovation work, and let's get more efficient and more collaborative. I think the concepts are beginning to get stronger hold in most organizations. When you look at structures, practices, incentives, they haven't quite evolved yet. So my perspective is I think we're working towards a tipping point where we go from conceptual awareness to action and evolution, right? And as we do that, my sense is the organizations that are going to really win, that are going to really thrive over the next 5 to 10 years, are the organizations that become really customer obsessed, right? I really want to understand who my customers are and who my prospects are, right? I'm at least as fascinated by the people who aren't customers yet as I am about my current customers. what are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are their unmet needs as new technology kind of reestablishes the art of the possible? How can we evolve the way that we deliver value to our new and our potential customers, right? So becoming customer obsessed is the foundation, is going to be the foundation for success as industries evolve really, really rapidly. That next part of then how do we innovate more effectively? That's got to start with clear market insights. And some of the work that Strategy Tools is doing to enable organizations to understand emerging market shifts, identify weak signaling, understand that inflection point where investment and action is really, really important. It's really critical, in fact. That's going to be a critical enabler. And not all organizations do that particularly well today. But then, would you agree?
I totally agree with you. Moreover, I can see that if in one hand, there is this conceptual agreement around agility, as you said, and the need for a more action and implementation attitude. Yeah. There is something else. I can see here, at least in Brazil, Jason, that most companies invest money, time, and energy in, let's say, an agile, tactical, and operational transformation, you know? But whenever we want to speak about strategy or a more business impactful way, and let's say strategic agility, as we used to say at Strategy Tools, we can find it. And I realized that maybe it lacks a common language between the C-suite and the middle managers, for example. How do you see companies in the US and other countries that you also know in this issue?
I totally agree. I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's this gulf between conceptual awareness and then action and investment, right? I think that the legacy or the path dependency of agile practices, having come up in tech, right, has some challenges. It's got some opportunities. It developed to deal very well with a lot of complexity and a desire to move at pace and to innovate, right? And in tech, that's an absolute requirement, necessity. Is rapidly becoming one for all other industries. But the challenge is a lot of our practices, a lot of our language is rooted in kind of a technical context. And so one of the things that we're spending a lot of time today really working on is bridging the concepts and the context that you're trying to solve for into terms that really resonate with core business people, right? So rather than talking about sprints and innovation practices, we talk about, do you need to get to market faster? Do you feel like you need to innovate to be able to innovate on faster on a more consistent basis in a more targeted way? In terms of delivery, I talk a little less about lean practices and value streams, and I talk more about how do you create a frictionless delivery environment in which great ideas go from concept to impact as rapidly as possible, right? Yeah. So I think we're working to evolve the language, the context, and maybe even broaden some of the concepts to include functions like finance, like HR, like vendor management, and for God's sakes, legal. We used to joke and say, hey, we can be as agile as we want until you have a legal issue and you better add a quarter to your timeline, right?
Yeah. Yeah, moreover, we are now aware that we don't need only efficiency improvement, performance improvement, but now we need more resilient companies.
Yeah.
I like the word anti-fragile from Nassim Taleb's work.
Yeah, totally
or
agree.
Maybe the transformational company, as we use in our works at Strategy Tools, like our program, Building the Transformational Company. So there is no space, I think, in this new normal only for companies that dedicate themselves in improving the core business, cost reduction, and so on. but we need to explore new business models as we used to speak about it. And tactical agility isn't enough. We need to improve it and to upgrade it to a strategic agility in order to reach this ambidextrous organization, both exploiting and exploring new business models. But I can see that we have a challenge here, which is a skills gap, because I'm not sure that we can reskill or develop the proper capabilities in our employees in the right pace, or at least we can imagine something, of course, much faster than we can implement it. And I think I'm not sure if it is the most difficult challenge that we have, but for sure one of them, how to put people in this right pace. How can we change those, for example, C-suite, and as well the middle managers, driving them all to this new language in order to implement what our concepts are telling us. I think that there is this skills gap. I'm not sure we can move as fast as we would like, or maybe as we want to.
Yeah, 100%. This is where I think as advisors, and I prefer to think of myself as a strategic advisor than a consultant, right? So as an advisor, I try to be really careful walking into a new culture and the way I have these conversations. Because as an advisor from a 30,000 foot perspective, it's pretty easy to see where there are opportunities for growth, right? The challenge and the messiness gets in when you're actually leading, in that domain or in that organization, and you're coming in. And in my last role, I had about 40 teams rolling up to me, and every day it was 12 to 15 meetings, and there were issues and challenges and politics, and the context that leaders have to deliver in is an incredibly challenging one. So that discussion of how do we evolve, I think you hit on it earlier. The first is mindset, all right? The first is really clearly articulating the burning platform of the why. Why is this a strategic kind of imperative for your organization? The next question of what's your vision in this space? What's the vision for success? Because the model that most of us, look, I went through a classic MBA education. And for me, as I abstract what I learned in my MBA path is, success was about building a big brand, gaining broad-based distribution, driving economies of scale, making sure that you can market and kind of reach your customers, and deliver reasonable ish quality, right? And as a result, the management practices that we developed in that context were developed to solve those exact problems. So now we have 5-year rolling, very heavy capital plans, right? We've got lots of hierarchy because we've got to get big. We are, thinking about building a brand or messaging through very traditional, channels, right? Which is evolving rapidly. And we're kind of working in very command and control ways in relatively stable markets. Now the challenge is, that's the 20th century kind of driver of success, of competitive advantage. In the 21st century, the competitive landscape's just changed, right? Getting big means, a lot of complexity to evolve, right? So that actually can be a real challenge. It does have its advantages, but there are challenges related to that. Distribution doesn't exist anymore. I don't need to have a big brick and mortar distribution network. In fact, I don't want to, all right? It's a lot of expense related to that. If I can figure out how to get to the top of a Google search or really highly placed on an Amazon marketplace, and I have a good product, now all of a sudden I can totally disrupt, right? And that necessity to move at pace. Find that transient competitive advantage where I'm creating very targeted value during a period of time, and then do it again and again and again. That's the goal, right? So our management practices have to fundamentally evolve to capture or to address, what's driving competitive advantage today. Now, the question is, in my mind, how many people are telling that story in a way that 20-year veteran manager can really relate to? All right, because they've been very successful in the legacy model, right? I think you have to be able to paint really vivid pictures. And Chris does a fantastic job at Strategy Tools of talking about the Volkswagen use case, talking about the future of energy. And here are the examples of industries that are at the precipice of dramatic disruption, and how really visionary leaders are positioning their organization to navigate and ideally really benefit from the new, right? So that discussion about where do you start? It's got to start with mindset. It's got to start with a vision of we need to be able to move faster and maybe even clearer. I think success in the next 5 to 10 years is about being able to innovate and deliver very targeted value faster than your competitors, while also getting very, very efficient in your core delivery. All right, which typically is about leveraging automation, RPA, machine learning, AI-driven. It's bots, it's self-service. How do you get really, really lean and elastic in the way that you deliver kind of recurring service while you're innovating the next, business model or product strategy?
Yeah, I would follow you, and I would say that we should innovate in the strategy discipline itself. For example, you use some Rita McGrath's concepts like transient advantages and seeing around the corners and the competitive arenas and so on, and connecting these new concepts of strategy thinking to the necessity of changing mindsets.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you about specifically the strategist mindset, because at least here in Brazil, I can see many executives speaking. And let's bring again this subject on language and narratives. I can't see many executives as I would like to see in the same page that we are, for example, now talking. I still look at many strategy teams and management teams, and as well in the C-suite. For example, speaking about SWOT analysis and 5 forces and value chains analysis. So language creates reality, and moreover, language shows up the mindset.
Oh yeah,
so
it's a reflection of the mindset, right?
It's a reflection of the mindset. So it is difficult to change mindsets, but maybe a way of assessing the mindset, and as well a way of improving or fastening this new behavior for the strategist himself, is to addressing these issues using new concepts and integrating them into the daily basis job that we have as managers. And that's where I think strategy tools have a huge importance, that's what I'm trying to do here in Brazil too, to promote these ideas and to spread away the word of this new school of strategy, because I think it's daring, but I think it's not wrong. We are trying to build another school of strategy, quite different, and maybe we could say that this is the future school of strategy, for the strategy for the new normal that we are trying to figure out.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you. I think it's a bit of a yes and discussion, right? I'm not sure that it's a new approach to strategy, I think it's a refined evolution to the way that we think about strategy.
Cool.
I'm old enough that I when I came out of undergrad, it was at the very front end of the .com period, right? And so, I like to say often that I think we're going through a period now, and I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to go through a period of technologically driven disruption that's maybe even more profound than the .com internet period. Taken alone, no one technology today is as impactful as the move to web-based services. But when you start looking at them collectively, and the path to AI, the path to cloud, autonomous delivery, RPA, blockchain, holistically, they're unbelievably disruptive, right? So I think we can actually look back to the 1998 through 2003, 2004, and we had a nice little test kitchen of how traditional strategy analysis and strategy practices were insufficient to respond to the rapid or to the pace of innovation and disruption during that period. Not only strategy, but our structures. Our structures were, let's say, org structure, performance management, 12 to 18 month annual planning cycles, developed to compete in relatively stable, relatively slow moving markets. All of a sudden, wow, you're planning in 18-month cycles and the market is moving on a quarterly or monthly basis, right? So that discussion of, okay, when the pace of innovation is driving such rapid, uncertain change, how do your strategy practices, how do your structures, how do your methods, how do your ways of working need to evolve in tandem to respond to the competitive context that you're in today, right? So let me throw one last thing in here. I think there's a dimension of being a really effective strategic consultant or a strategic advisor that is sometimes overlooked. It certainly was for me. I finished an entire MBA, strategy track at one of the top 10 business schools in the country or in the U.S. And I don't think I had a single storytelling class. Right? I had a executive presentations class. Here's how you get up in front and present well, and here's how you organize a PowerPoint. But in the kind of Steve Denning, kind of Carmine Gallo type of context of how do you tell really compelling vision stories that resonate with people and kind of have them walking away thinking about that discussion on their drive home. Right? When we're talking about dramatic transformation, like a really impactful transition of practices and mindset, you have to get good at that. Right? It's not simply a data-driven presentation or process. And this is where I think a lot of people who came up the more traditional strategy consulting, I'm going to crunch a bunch of numbers, I'm going to build a model, and it's going to spit something out, and it's going to say pivot to the right. Right? That's part of it. But that next part of how do I engage and really get a share of mindset and get a seat at the table so that as organizations are walking through this journey or taking that journey, that you can help them accelerate their path, kind of benefit from the learnings of others, and get really targeted about what that needs to look like for their specific culture. Does that resonate?
Yeah, totally. I like to use I like to invite my clients. Well, previously when I used to be in consulting engagements, I like to invite my clients to think about moving from an annual planning with quarter reviews of KPIs into strategy as a journey approach.
Yeah.
With bi-weekly or maybe weekly meetings, and I think this is, for example, an application of the agility mindset into a schedule, to the,
Oh, yeah.
the agenda of the leaders themselves there in the company. So yeah, totally agree. Jason, let me try to move our talks here to a more economic way, and I'd love to listen to your thoughts about, for example, globalization, international trade, and how maybe can we figure out the relations amongst the main countries and also the multinationals companies in this new normal to come, because we can speak about logistics in two ways. We can, for example, talk about the digital environment and all intangible assets and all data and knowledge, and as well as software and services, cloud computing based services. This is a way of speaking about the logistics of this new normal. But if we look to the supply chains, to the goods, and also to the airplanes that somehow someday are going to come back to our lives, how do you imagine we are going to live in the next, I don't know, 12 months? How would be this geopolitics and this globalization world? Do you think we are going to face a whole different world, a kind of different world, or do you believe we are going to just come back to this, let's say, US and China commercial trade issues that we are used to see?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, international trade, logistics, implications post-COVID. Okay. So those are all fascinating questions, and I wish I had a magic crystal ball that I could take a look in. If I did, I would my trading results would be much better in the stock market. And so what I often say is near-term implications around these results are difficult to model and anticipate. Longer term, though, it's probably I would say clearer in terms of how this stuff is likely going to play out. I think near term, it's anybody's guess because there's so much political risk. There's macroeconomic risk. There's a lot of engagement from central banks. So questions of what that's going to do to debt levels and potential inflation or deflation if we have a difficult time getting economic value or economic kind of activity to jumpstart again, right? So there's lots and lots of questions in the near term. What I would say though is the implications of what we're seeing, from a macro trend perspective, are pretty clear. I think the likelihood of things changing slower is pretty unlikely. I think the likelihood of things being less competitive is also equally unlikely. The likelihood of technology and kind of augmented decision making not impacting the future of work, no way, it's impossible. It's coming. All right. So that question of how do we deal with really amazing levels of international competition? I mean, that is why that discussion of innovation is so important. If you're worried about IP protection, if you're worried about other countries, copying IP and replicating it more cheaply, there's two things that we need to do. One, we do need to figure out eventually a more kind of global trade and IP protection. We have lots of opportunities for improvement there. The second part, though, is that kind of Apple, model of just innovating faster than your competitors can keep up and cannibalizing your own product faster than they can. That's the best protection. And not always possible, but that's what we should be aspiring to. Second is customer loyalty. You want to develop really sticky, rich relationships. It's not just about the technology, it's how you apply it in your specific context with customers to solve their problems, and if or their jobs to be done in a broader context. When you develop a relationship with customers where they firmly believe that you're the organization that's going to make things easier for them to do what they want, you're going to deliver great experiences, then that's the way to kind of defend from the kind of innovation and disruption cycle. Like the logistics are going to be really interesting. All right, so for the foreseeable future, I don't see it changing a lot. Right, supply chains, are going to be relatively inelastic. I think the one implication I think is that countries and maybe even organizations are going to start looking at geographic risk around their supply chains in a different way. All right, I can't have my 6 out of my 7 suppliers all based in China. Right, it's just too much geographic risk moving forward. Countries are going to start looking, I think, more at that as well. I can't have 80% of my IV bags produced externally from the country, all right, especially in a single region, because if you get natural disaster or a pandemic in that region, all of a sudden I'm really crippled. So I think we're going to start looking at risk management around supply chains a little differently. Longer term, that discussion around logistics, to me, is a fascinating one, because as we start getting into drone-based autonomous delivery, as we get into 3D printing, I mean, think about this. There's a future, and we've seen it in the movies, where there is no delivery, right? There is a order a spec online, and if you have the right components in your 3D printer, I can just print it in real time. So I'm not going down to the local hardware shop to get a plastics part for my car. I just print it at home.
You won't need ships coming from China, bringing the goods.
Yeah, well, so ships coming in from China, again, near term, I don't think that's going to change a lot. In fact, the price of oil is going to be a little discouraging in terms of some creative ways, to that may be a little bit of a headwind, but longer term, right? No doubt about it. There's going to be diversification from a risk perspective around critical supply chain management. And then, I think that discussion about autonomous delivery and fulfillment is going to really be disruptive for many, many industries.
So maybe we could think about not a drawback in the globalization, not a less globalized world, but a different globalized world. Because whenever we thought about, let's say, a ship coming from China, bringing the goods that we just ordered through an Amazon site, in the near future, or in this new normal that we are trying to imagine, we will have not less, neither more, but a different globalized world. Would it be what? Yeah,
it's difficult to model, right? So it could be more, could be less. Frankly, I think as China works up, their competitiveness, they're beginning to get more expensive. So we're actually starting to see more diversification of supply chains already in Vietnam and the Philippines, and so there's already some of that taking place. But I think, this is where my background in economics kind of really influences my thinking. I think people are still very value driven. If I can get a good significantly cheaper, and it's not a health risk much, typically people still are value driven. All right. So when it comes to commoditized supply chains, the group that can provide consistent quality at a price point advantage, it's likely still going to win. All right. That's probably not going away. That's why I think you want to be more on the innovation-driven, differentiated, service delivery side. Or if you are in a more commoditized space, particularly on the services side, boy, you got to get automated quickly. All right, so you have to figure out how to leverage machine learning, process automation, self-service bots, anything that is going to drive a kind of lean efficiency across your delivery of those commoditized services is likely going to be a big driver of competitive advantage for the foreseeable future.
Okay, and Jason, what about global finances? Because we have seen in these maybe 30 years of an increasing in globalization, we have seen the borders coming down and the capital going through every country, venture capital too. But now global liquidity went down, and maybe we can see already many investments driving to USA, for example, a safer market.
Yeah.
It's how we were. That's what expected.
Yeah.
What can we foresee for this next months in terms of global liquidity and investments in across the world?
It's a good question. I think I'd like to give a little bit of a shout out to the central banks. To be honest, it's remarkable how little how few liquidity oriented challenges we've had in this global pandemic. And we obviously have more tools and more programs, and we've learned a lot. So I think the job that the central bankers have done during this period has been remarkable to address liquidity risks. Near term, there will likely be a push towards investing in safety, right, or kind of traditional investments. But we certainly saw this after 2008. There's a period where it's duck and cover, right? Let's move to safety, right? But yield always wins, right? So when you have an economy, let's say the U.S., that's been growing at 2.3, 2.4% year over year in traditional markets, facing a lot of cost arbitrage, those regions of the world that are growing at 6, 7, 8% are always going to be very, very attractive. So I think the discussion of investment opportunities and how this works moving forward, like near term, I think there's going to be some uncertainty. Medium term, we'd love to see the efficient allocation of assets and capital to where that capital can drive the best return and the best value. So I personally don't care if it's a great idea that came out of China, a great idea that came out of South Africa, a great idea that came out of Sao Paulo. As long as I'm okay with the rule of law, and we're not having children working, as long as there's safety precautions and kind of baseline expectations, great, right? I want capital to flow where it can drive the most value. Longer term, I think the disruptive discussion is, what does blockchain do to investments, right, across the world? What does kind of increased AI-driven insights do to our ability to assess investment opportunities in other markets? I will tell you from personal experience, investing in China is really, really challenging because you're always questioning the accuracy of publicly available data. So when we have machine learning, pattern matching, AI-driven analytics, it may be easier to get better transparency into relatively opaque markets. And through blockchain and immutable kind of ownership, it's also a little safer to invest there. So I think longer term, that discussion of what are improved insights going to do? What role will blockchain have in making those types of trades safer? And what does that do to the efficiency of capital allocation around the world? It's going to be really, really fascinating.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's been a really nice dialogue with you, Jason. I've been making the same question for my last guests here. I would like to hear, what would you wish, if you could, what would be the desired new normal? If you could draw it, if you could design it, what would be the main changes for good, the main changes that we would like to have as permanent new normal landscape?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I love it as a how might we discussion because it moves away from competition in my mind. It moves away from products and supply chain. And to me, the new normal ideally would be a completely level playing field for everyone to compete with great ideas with a focus on adding value in ethical ways that are kind of mission driven and have a positive impact on society. Right. So in in an ideal kind of utopian world, is the global reach of great ideas, the acceleration of innovation, access to capital gives more and more people an opportunity to compete and their voice to be heard. And ideally, those distortions that have always existed in the markets and in society, continue to be eroded. Whether it's gender, whether it's age, whether it's religious orientation or your location in the world, right? Ideally, in the new normal, none of those should matter. If you're willing to be creative, if you've got a great idea, if you're willing to work hard, then the future should look really, really bright for those people. So for me, that's what the new normal represents, as an opportunity for, a more level playing, non-distorted, kind of smash the glass ceiling environment that we can all compete and prosper together in.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, let's take a last note. Would you be able to, well, recommend some, what would you recommend to business leaders and to executives to prepare for this new normal?
That's a great question. I think if it starts with mindset, I really appreciated that you brought Rita McGrath's name up, because I think starting with the seeing around corners and weak signals and how you operationalize the ability to be innovative and very deliberate in how you evolve your organization. I think that's that's a fantastic place to start. I think The Startup Way by Eric Ries starts to bring in those kind of lean startup, agile-oriented kind of practices into a larger structure. I think spending some time potentially with the BAI, the Business Agility Institute, and looking at some of the early work that we're doing there to tell that story and paint a picture of the path ahead. And then I think figuring out how to visualize, explore, and operationalize these practices in your own organization. Something like adopting strategy tools and engaging folks who can have that discussion with you in terms of what should that look like within your specific culture, within your competitive context, and how do we position your organization and your people to thrive in these rapidly evolving, very, very competitive environments. I think that combination is probably where I would start.
Yeah, great advice, Jasen. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate our dialogue, our conversation. I hope we can keep in touch and maybe repeat it. Somehow we are trying to develop as the world is developing. So let's keep the same pace of change. Let's try, and maybe we can foresee some good reasons to go forward to this new normal together, and as you said, in a more collaborative way.
Hey, Tiago, I really appreciate the time. I would love to spend some more time with you, so let me know how I can help.
Okay, thanks a lot.